Hey guys, it's me Jay again. I'm gonna make my third attempt to do this video um, on the documentary Crip Camp by Barack Obama and Michelle. It's a 2020 documentary, and it's basically about this group of teens in the 1970s who attended a special needs summer camp in the Catskills in New York, a camp called Camp Janaid. Camp Janaid was established in 1951. Was established as a regular summer camp, but later transitioned in the 60s to a summer camp for individuals with special needs. And it was run by um, what you would call hippies or people that were considered at the time radical leftist activists. And it was a chance to give disabled teens a semblance of normal normal life. It follows John James Dietrich, I believe his name is. Um, sorry, James Lebrecht uh, and Judith Human, who are the two main protagonists in the story. It follows several other people, but these two particularly stand out. James is an individual with spina bifida. He works now as a radio DJ or some kind of media programmer. And Judith became a very high ranking advocate for people with disabilities through her work in the disabled community. Um, what I loved about this film was that what it showed me as a disabled person, as I have cerebral palsy. I was born with cerebral palsy in 1985. I was diagnosed at the age of 6 months, and I get around with the use of a motorized wheelchair. And I was fortunate to be born in the 1980s and to have grown up in a time where there was more access to resources for people with disabilities. But these individuals did not grow up in that time. The summer that they speak about takes place in 1972. Um, and, many of them had not experienced normal, quote unquote, normal lives ever. In So this was something completely new to them, particularly James. He talks about how his friends at home would try to make him feel as normal as possible, but it was hard because he couldn't really get around and couldn't really do the things that he wanted to do. Um, the other kids were doing. And the same thing with Judith. She said that when she went to school, at first she couldn't go to school. She was homeschooled. But then when she finally did get a chance to go to school, they had to bring other able-bodied students down to mingle with her, just because nobody wanted to mingle with her in the first place. And one guy in the documentary brings up an interesting point that in our popular culture, throughout the history of our popular culture, there's always been depictions of people with disabilities as strange, evil, like Hunchback of Notre Dame, like Hook in the Peter Pan in the Peter Pan movies. Sit back, okay. Yeah, that is my friend telling me to sit back, to not be so close to the camera. Sometimes I get a little close to the camera and it can't really see me. But here I am sitting back, lounging, if you will. So anyway, depictions in our popular culture about people with disabilities like Quasimodo and Hook damaging stereotypes to us. And it really has never been no positive stereotypes. So this is just like other minority groups, LGBT people and others, it informs how the general public looks at people with disabilities. There has never been a positive depiction of people with disabilities on TV until very recently. And this documentary really um, doesn't really delve into that, but it delves into the effects that those negative images have on uh, society and why people with disabilities were looked at as undesirable in the in the culture. It also deals with what one woman with cerebral palsy calls the hierarchy of disabilities. She says that people with polio, like Judith, are placed at a higher rank because they quote unquote look more normal, whereas people with cerebral palsy are placed at a lower bottom of the totem pole. So even within the community, there was still stratification. And it goes into also what their summer was like. You know, how they swim, how they exercised, how they socialized, even how they got into relationships. One guy talks about how he learned how to first make out with a female counselor, and then finally a female camper touched his penis, and that was one of the greatest experiences of his life. And he starts laughing. It's funny. It's funny to me because he starts laughing right when his future wife, who also was a camper there, is seeing, so they could laugh it up. You know, I really love those old couples that could really look back on their relationships that they had with other people and really reflect on it in a positive nature. You know what I mean? Because even with this particular woman that was his wife, she talks about an incident with her. And to some people, it would seem very strange that she was working as an intern for the United Cerebral Palsy, and she had an affair with one of the bus drivers. So she becomes really sick, and her parents think that it's appendicitis, but it isn't. It's gonorrhea. She contracted a sexually transmitted disease. And normally, people with gonorrhea would say, "Oh my God, I contracted gonorrhea. I, you know, I'm in trouble. Like, let me, I'm really sick." But in her situation, she she says, "You know what? It kind of made me feel proud because somebody wanted to, and excuse my language, well, I'll clean it up for you too. But somebody wanted to have sex with me. Somebody wanted to f with me." That's her exact words. And it was like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And those were like that couple were really funny. Like they had the funny humor to it. Most of the humor came from that couple, you know. But um, Judith, the activist lady, her scenes were very serious. In the beginning, she's talking about lunch. She's talking about organizing lunch. She's saying that they wanted to get veal, but they couldn't afford veal, so they had to get pasta. So you could tell right from the very beginning that she had a lot of leadership skills. You know, that she was going to take charge, even when they were at camp, that she was going to take charge. And that's what she eventually does. When they get out of camp, that she in particular is inspired to, to change the trajectory of the view of disabled people. You know, she's inspired to go on these protests and sit-ins, and she's inspired by the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King, the sit-ins that he had in the South, the sit-ins that he had in the marches that he had in Washington, 1963, the marches that he had in Spokane in the late 60s. She's inspired by that, and she wants to do the same thing for her community. So she organizes this one march in New York City in 72, where a bunch of wheelchairs blocked the entire traffic in all of New York City, and it makes the national news. And then the government at that time, run by Richard Nixon, could not ignore it. They couldn't ignore it because here you had all these bunch of wheelchairs blocking daily traffic in the biggest city in America, and they couldn't just ignore it. But Nixon doesn't pass the bill. Nixon vetoes the bill, of course, because Richard Nixon was a Republican, and we spoke before on my channel how Republicans are against passing any legislation that has to do with equality for the disabled or equality for any group, really, if it costs money. It's all down to dollars and cents with them. Now, when we fast forward to the ADA, people say, well, George Bush Jr., George Bush Sr., rather, passed the ADA. He was a Republican, so why, um, you know, how does that make sense? Yeah, but the ADA really didn't cost the government anything. In order to make the the trains and the buses accessible in New York City, it's going to cost the government a hell of a lot of money. The ADA really affected, really not that much. In fact, if you still live in New York City, even today in 2020, you will come across instances where you'll be a wheelchair user, and certain trains are not accessible. I came across this back in 2004 when I was traveling to Chinatown. One stop was accessible and the other one wasn't. So it was just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do on the other end? And the guy, Jimmy, he has the same experience because he's a lot younger. He's a high school student and he wants to get involved in the politics that Judy and them are involved in, but he can't because he's in high school. So once he says, you know what, the hell with just school, I want to be some part of something bigger. As the old saying goes, being part of something special makes you special. So he wants to be a part of it. He skips school. He goes to um, where they're meeting at. And it's like he gets there, and the trains are not accessible. So he has to drag his wheelchair. First, drag himself by bumping his butt up the stairs, and then drag his chair up the stairs. And you're just like, oh my God, wow. And from a standpoint of a disabled person, you know what I mean? I never did that, you know what I mean? Because I wouldn't be able to do it. But because individuals with spina bifida, if you don't know anything about it, they tend to have really strong upper body strength. Even like some of my closest friends, like my friend, you know, Eugene, like they're really strong like bulls, and he was able to do it. And you could even tell by the way he was built that he was able to do that. But people with CP, especially spastic quadriplegic CP, not really able to have that kind of upper body strength. You know what I mean? So they wouldn't be able to do that. But the fact that he was able to do that was amazing. And he was the character that I really gravitated to because he was very charismatic. He works in media. In the beginning, they show him climbing a ladder to get to his radio booth, you know, and He says that camp helped him get out of his shell because in school he wasn't one of the cool kids, He was one of the ostracized kids because of his disability. But in camp he was one of the cool kids. He even had a girlfriend. And there's this one scene in the movie where in a camp they have like bugs around or whatever, crabs I think, and the kid boys and girls can't be together. And he has his girl, and his girl and him is their 1 week anniversary, and his girl and him are separated, during that day because the boys and girls couldn't be together. And it was like, it was really sweet, but it really, for a lot of people that don't have disabilities, it really normalized, I feel, the disabled experience for a lot of people because a lot of people, and they mention this in the film, and this is something I've always said, people in the able-bodied society, people in the society of the able-bodied people, um, they they asexualize people with disabilities. They think, oh, they're never gonna have boyfriends, they're never gonna have girlfriends, they're never gonna have wives, they're never gonna have kids, they're never gonna have husbands. You know what I mean? And it's like this film shows that there was some disabled people that were part of the LGBT community, like that one kid. I forget his name, but he had the long hair. He was part of the LGBT community. He was doing performances with a Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know, he was out there. He was active. But one of the things he said in the conversation was that if you're passive and you have a disability, you're screwed because people will walk all over you. And that's one of the things that, especially my mom, always stresses to me that you have to speak up and you have to be vocal because as a person with a disability, people will take advantage of you financially and sometimes even physically. And it shows this in the film. That a lot of these individuals were taken advantage of, like the lady that got gonorrhea sexually, or they were taken advantage of in different ways. It shows the importance of being vocal. And a lot of times, on a personal level, I struggle with being out there and being vocal as I should be, just because I feel, you know, intimidated to some degree by being a person with a disability and speaking out to the powers that be, the authorities, on my needs. You know, every day is a work in progress, but like I, I just, it is very hard. And this film, this documentary does touch on that. All the documentaries I ever watched about disabled issues and non-disabled issues as well. This documentary really touched me, and I felt I had to make a video right away because I never had a documentary or a piece of film touch me on such a personal level. And I thank the producers and, of course, Barack Obama, who I love and adore, uh, because of what he's done for people with disabilities. And like the lady said, the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, was passed in 1990, but we still have a long way to go in advocacy for people with disabilities, apartments, housing, um, the fact that people with disabilities cannot even become legally married without having half of their finances having half of their finances cut. this is something we got to speak about. My channel is a video channel that makes not a ton of money, but it makes quite a bit of money on hits that deal with entertainment, they deal with professional wrestling, they deal with general news stuff. But this right here, this topic is close to my heart. I don't speak about being wheelchair bound, speak about having a disability all that much because I don't really most of the time I don't really see myself as anything different than a normal person. But unfortunately, society doesn't see it that way. So this film is really part of my personal journey into realization of how important it is to be a self advocate. Because, and the film touches on this, how the disabled rights movement paralleled that of the Black liberation movement. And I've talked before, and I've received a lot of flack from people on my page about my feelings of Black Lives Matter, my feelings of African American activism. But in this film, one of the counselors is African American. He's from Mobile, Alabama, home of Jim Crow. And he kind of parallels his experience, especially when he talks about how they would stare at them and they would not want them around. His experience with um, being a black man in America with that of being a disabled person in the world. Because while African American people and LGBT people might have struggled as far as in America, people with disabilities struggle all around the world, and particularly developing nations. Nations like India, nations like Africa, where people with and they talk about this in the documentary, where people with disabilities are killed off by other members of their tribes and communities. Here in the United States, while they were not killed off after the eugenics movement, they were put away in institutions, and they show these institutions, they show the conditions of these institutions. They were so bad and they were so starved in these institutions that they were put on this place, Roosevelt Island, that when this one individual went to the camp, the guy James described him as a wild animal because all he did was eat and eat and eat and shove food into his mouth like he wasn't going to eat, never get another meal in his whole life. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think a lot of times, and again, this is touched on in the documentary, a lot of times our parents and our caregivers, they they want the best for us, so they try to shield us from the normal things. Like the one girl, I think her name is Nancy D'Angelo, that was James's girlfriend. They were having this conference all around the table, and she says, I'm not treated the same way as my brothers and sisters are treated. They get freedoms that I don't get. And my parents always say, you can't do this, you can't do that because you're in a wheelchair. And it's like, why? I mean, I can achieve anything I want to achieve, being in a wheelchair. So what? You know what I mean? But society really doesn't equip us with the tools to do that. You know what I mean? Like, we are taught that we live this life in SSI, and that's all that's offered to us. Being able to go to school, being able to achieve something in society like a career, a family, kids, or whatever is denied from us. So many people that I know on a personal level, and this is veering off the subject of the documentary, but they're deemed to be not good parents. They're deemed as perpetual children, asexualized, Like I could kind of understand where that lady was coming from, because yeah, she had gonorrhea, she had a sexually transmitted disease, but she finally felt like somebody loved her, even though they took advantage of her. Nobody even looked in her direction before in that way. You know what I mean? Nobody even, excuse my language, asked her. So she kind of felt happy about that. And I loved her jovial attitude about that, because usually something like that would take on a darker tone, you know? And like, you could see the counselors too, they would joke around with them. One guy, Larry Allison, was digging holes so that when they get out of the pool, they would trip. And you think, and like the normal society would think, yo, that's so mean. How can you do that to disabled people? But he was just joking around with them. He was just messing with them. Excuse me. He was just joking around with them, and he was just messing with them. And that's what we want. I feel like I want somebody to joke around with me, somebody to kid around with me, somebody to laugh with me and treat me like I'm a person. Because in the end of the day, we might get around differently, but we're all people. You know what I'm saying? We all want to be treated with respect and dignity. And this African American counselor really connected that to his experience when he talked about how in Mobile, Alabama, he couldn't even look a white man in the eye because uh, even there was no respect. So and then in the end it was really nice. They went back to the camp. One guy had a daughter, and it showed how that camp was able to bring them out of their shell and bring them into a sense of normalcy in society. you know and I really enjoy it. And I said in the beginning in the older video that I was gonna not do it because I was a little apprehensive. I don't really share my story as far as being disabled on here on YouTube because, again, my channel is primarily focused on things like wrestling, things like entertainment, things like general news, like about different war stuff that's going on. But for this, and those get a lot of views and they generate a lot of income for me. But this might not get no views, but this is important to me. You know what I'm saying? Because this is my community, and not only is it my community, this is my experience. I didn't go to Camp Junaid because it closed down in 1977, way before I was even born. But I did go to a camp in New Jersey that was very similar, called Camp Oakhurst. And in Camp Oakhurst, I felt like that character Jimmy. I broke out of my shell, and that was really cool. And I had a lot of friends, and the kind of loneliness and isolation that he felt when he came back to society was the kind of loneliness and isolation that I sometimes felt too. I opened up before about depression on my channel, but a lot of it is feeling a general sense of inadequacy, a general sense of lack of confidence. And when I was younger, camp really helped with that. Just like them, I had a girlfriend. I felt like I was normal. So camps like this are very good because, just like one woman said in the documentary, she said, you know, I learned how to do things for myself that I thought I would never be able to do, like dress myself. groom myself. It taught me life skills in certain cases, social skills to get along with other people in ways that my school, that it was also a place for disabilities, but didn't really um, didn't really connect on that level. Anyway, guys, that was the movie Crip Camp, and that was a little peek into my personal life. Peace. Have an enjoyable day. Love you guys, and remember, beneath the skin, we're all human.